international best practices for sustainable green public procurement policy and recommendations for the further development of a sustainable green public procurement policy in CARICOM countries. We are very much honored to have with us today experts in the field who will guide us through this discussion. Our moderator for today's session is Mr. David Barrett, who is an accomplished professional and practitioner in project management, renewable energy, climate change mitigation, and sustainable development. He holds a Master of Science in Energy and Environment from the University of Calgary and a Master's in Philosophy and Bachelor's in Zoology and Botany from the University of the West Indies. He's also a certified energy manager and a North American-based certified energy professional. He has a 30-year career in public and private sector, spanning multiple themes, including renewable energy, oil and gas, and minerals mining. As an experienced consultant, David has provided expertise in energy policy, project and environmental management, and sustainable energy solutions for various projects funded by UNDP, UNEP, IDB, USAID, and SICRI, among others. In academia, he is an adjunct lecturer at the University of West Indies Mona campus for the MSc level energy courses. Currently, he is an energy and mobility advisor for the GIZ for the project supporting the implementation of NDCs in the Caribbean, transforming the transport and energy sectors towards a low carbon and climate resilient future, which is the NDC Tech project, supporting climate friendly and sustainable transportation. Joining us is our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Olev Homeyer, Senior Professor for Energy and Resource Economics at the Europa Universität Flensburg, Germany. Their insights today will help us have a better understanding of the opportunities and challenges ahead. Before we begin, I would just like to go over some procedural matters to ensure that we have a smooth experience for those who are joining us. So first of all, we ask of you to keep your microphones muted unless you're invited to speak. So this minimizes the amount of background noise and helps keep the focus on the presenter. Second, you're free to use the chat box to share whatever thoughts or questions that you may have. We will have a dedicated question and answer segment at the conclusion of the presentation, and we'll do our best to address whatever questions that you may have. We ask that you also be respectful and professional in your interactions, given that we are all here to learn and to share ideas and keep the conversation constructive and inclusive. And just a point to note is that the webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording based on the requests that we receive from the participants. And we'd like to ask that if you have any technical issues, that you communicate to us via the chat box so we can see how best we can seek to address that. So I'll now hand you over to David, who will be the moderator for today's session. Over to you, David.
Hi, good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, David, we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. So happy to have so many of you online, and I trust that others will join us along the way. Certainly, it's an important intersection for the development of electric mobility in the region. And it's been said, and it is true, that oftentimes when government leads, changes happen. And so some of the work that was done by Prof. Omar and his colleague Woodrow Whiteley leads into this direction of how to encourage the government to engage with electric mobility through the development of policies and the application of policies. And he will certainly speak on that. And I know that you will be fully informed on the way forward. This work was done for the 5 countries within our projects, and there is focus on our flagship projects, but I won't speak more on that. Prof. Homer will do so. Let me introduce Professor Homer. He's a senior professor for energy and resource economics at the Europa Universität Flensburg in Germany, where he served as ordinary professor from 1998 to 2020. He's a founder and director of Global Sustainable Energy Consultants in Barbados, and he's a co-founder and managing partner of SCS Omar Partner GmbH, an energy and climate consultancy operating out of Flensburg in Germany. He has served small island developing states as an advisor to the Minister of Environment, Energy, and Climate Change of the Republic of the Seychelles on energy policy and renewable energy. He was a member of a consulting group to the governor of the Caribbean Bank of Barbados on the energy future of Barbados, and a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, Barbados. So he comes with international experience, but also Caribbean regional experience. In other roles in Germany, he was a member of the Future Commission and Energy Commission of the Federal State of Schleswig-Holstein, and served as an advisor of the Council of Environmental Advisors to the German government, and was a council member in charge of the Special Report Pathway to 100% Renewable Energy Supply. He has headed the Regional Department, Environmental Management and Environmental and Resource Economics of the Center of European Economic Research in Germany, and served as Deputy Head of the Research Department, Energy and Environment of the Fraunhofer, Prof, you will give us the proper pronunciation, Institute of Systems and Innovation Research, again in Germany, and then also as the Deputy Head of the Research Department for Technical Change of the same institution. Regarding climate change, he has been a lead author of several reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC as we know it, served as vice chair of the working group of the IPCC and coordinator of the scoping process for the IPCC Special Report on Renewable Energy, which was published in 2011. And he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. He earned his PhD at the University of Bremen on social costs of energy. He has a degree in economics from the University of Bremen and economics and computer science at Tugolo University in Mississippi. His main research focus is on sustainable energy systems based on 100% renewable energy sources and the development of local, regional, and national climate change mitigation strategies with the aim of full climate neutrality of human activities. Prof, we look forward to the presentation.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for a lengthy introduction and hopefully shed a little bit of light, but let me now go to my presentation. I hope everybody can see the presentation now on their screens. What I want to take you through today is the question of using public procurement in the transport sector to help jumpstart the green e-mobility in the Caribbean. That was at the heart of our part of the project that David just described, looking into green e-mobility, green mobility and renewables in the Caribbean on a wider scale, but our specific aspect was to look at what role public green procurement could play in this, and where actually are we at if we look at the situation in the CARICOM in 5 CARICOM member states as we did. I will take you through some basic questions, looking at, well, what actually is sustainable green public procurement that we're concentrating on here. And then the question, how does it connect to transport and to sustainable transport? Once we see, okay, it can play a major role, then I'll look at what we have as international best practice in sustainable green public procurement practices. And then once we have looked at the international best standards, we look at the regional situation and at the status in the 5 countries that were at the heart of our analysis in the project. From all of that, we derived some recommendations for the future development of sustainable green procurement in the Caribbean countries to actually help use this approach for helping green mobility. So that's what I want to take you through within the next 45 minutes, and then we will have time for discussion. So first question is, what actually is sustainable green public procurement? And if you look at that, you find different definitions. First, you run into what they call green public procurement, and that actually is procurement that goes beyond normal procurement, but it concentrates on environmental issues as well. So the EU Commission defines green public procurement as a process whereby public authorities seek to produce goods and services and works with a reduced environmental impact through their lifetime. And of course, this compares to what you would have procured if those aspects were not looked at. So green public procurement looks at the environmental impacts on top of the normal procurement procedure. Now, there are other definitions that you may run into, and somebody says, well, sustainable public procurement. Okay, how much is that the same? How much does it actually overlap, or is it something totally different? Now, for sustainable public procurement, again, we have a nice international definition by the UN organization, the UNEP. And UNEP defines sustainable public procurement as a process whereby public organizations meet their needs for everything in a way that achieves value for money across the whole life cycle in terms of generating benefits, not only just for their organization, but also for society and economy, and minimizing damages to the environment. So it actually contains the environmental aspect, but it goes beyond it. It looks at the social and economic impacts on society that this procurement has. So the sustainable green public procurement is the wider understanding of what we're talking about. And in the project, we looked at kind of this wider definition and see, okay, what does it take and how far has this already been taken on board in the CARICOM countries? Question is, why use sustainable green public procurement in transport? Okay, is there something special about this? Now, if you look at the situation as it is in the Caribbean, just as an example, you find that the greenhouse gas emissions, if we talk about climate change mitigation, the greenhouse gas emissions of Caribbean countries, most of the time, are stemming from transport to a quarter to a fifth of all the GHG emissions from the countries come from transport. And transport emissions are increasing tremendously over the time from 1990 to 2024. In St. Lucia, 300% increase. In Grenada, 289% increase. In Jamaica, still 147%. So transport emissions have been growing very fast. So their share in our greenhouse gas emissions is increasing substantially. And if we want to solve the problem, we really have to tackle that. So green transport, getting rid of the greenhouse gas emissions from transport is mandatory. Now, one of the ideal ways to get rid of emissions from the transport sector is to move from internal combustion engines, ICE, we cut that short, to electric mobility. Why so? Somebody may say, okay, if you produce the electricity for your e-vehicle in a diesel-fired power plant, where is the difference from driving the diesel on the road? Well, even there is still a difference in efficiency because a car with a combustion engine is an awfully inefficient device. The ICE vehicle converts only 16 to 25% in the very best cases, in the worst case, 16% of the fuel into movement, traction. So what we get to the wheel is just a small portion of our energy. If we look at electrical vehicles, the electricity in the battery actually is converted to 85 to 90% into traction, into movement. Okay? We may have a power plant behind that electricity production that has some efficiency losses as well. And let's assume it's a bad power plant. It only has 35% efficiency. If we combine that with the electrical engine, we still have 30 to 32% efficiency. So we're at clearly better system efficiency than if we would burn the diesel directly in the engine. So even the step within an entirely fossil electricity system from combustion engine to electrical mobility already gets you a reduction in your emissions, in the energy input and in the emissions. The more you move away from fossil fuels in electricity production, the more you move towards wind and solar, the more the high efficiency of your electrical car translates into a whole system efficiency that gets up to 100% renewables, gets 85 to 90% of your energy intake onto the road. So that's the ideal situation. Everything in between already helps. So if we look at, for example, the situation in Jamaica, there you have the efficiency of the ICE, the internal combustion engine vehicle, with just 20%, the bar to the left hand. And then as soon as you move just in the Jamaican system as it is today with 14% renewables, we already get a system efficiency for the car of 40.5%. And if we step up the renewable share to 50%, we get to 59% system efficiency. And if we would use the 100% renewables, we would have 78% efficiency. How does that now translate into emission reductions? Transport emissions in Jamaica from internal combustion engines have been 2.68 million tons, latest year reported. If we shift to electrical vehicles, we go even further down than with the efficiency. We improve on the emissions from 2.68 to 1.05. Going to 50% renewables, it's only 0.6 million tons. And going to 100% renewables, it's virtually zero. So we have a pretty high lever if we use e-mobility as one way forward to decarbonize our energy use in total. Now, how does public procurement come into play? Governments procure a lot of stuff. If you look at the share of procurement in the gross domestic product, so everything that's kind of produced in a country, and you look at the share of government procurement buying things, Antigua, Barbuda, 13%, Belize, 15%, Grenada, 12%, Jamaica, even 30% of the GDP goes through public procurement. St. Lucia, 12%. On world average, 12.5. So well over 10% of our GDP value is actually going through public procurement. Public procurement is an important part of every market here. So we need to have a look, what can we do in transport? And if we just take the transport share, the cars and vehicles that are procured by governments, we're still in the single digit percentage range. So anywhere between 1.5 and 3% of the GDP of the 5 project countries, that value is equivalent to just the transport procurement, vehicle procurement in those countries. So we're looking again at a substantial part of the market and a bit of market power. So if we can actually utilize this public procurement for steering towards e-mobility, we have good way forward to influence things. So the transition to e-mobility, on the one hand side, we've seen can massively reduce greenhouse gas emissions. E-vehicles are best combined with a fast transition to renewable energy. So move to e-mobility and move to renewable electricity generation at the same time, and you maximize the benefits. And the procurement of e-vehicles by the governments can help to jumpstart the market and the infrastructure development because it's a substantial share of what's going on. Okay, now we understand public procurement can play a very positive role in what we want to achieve. Now, where are we at? If we look at the international best practice of sustainable green public procurement policies, and how can we compare that to what's going on in the region and what can we improve? Now, if we look at public procurement processes, sustainable public procurement, there are certain steps that you should all include in the process on top of the basic principles. Basic principle is best value for money over the lifetime and include environmental, social, and economic aspects. And then we go down the list of 9 major steps to run a proper process. We identify the need. Sometimes needs are misspecified or overstated. If you look at government cars, that sometimes happens. Then we need to consult the market to see, okay, what is actually locally available. We don't just want to specify a procurement process in a way that only international companies can come in and sell us the defined goods. Then, based on what we know about the market, we predefine the qualification criteria, write up the technical specifications to exactly specify what we need, issue the tender, evaluate the bids, and in the bid evaluation, again, the sustainability aspect, just like in the technical specifications, plays an important role. Then after that has been sorted, we award the contracts. And at the very end, after everything's done, we should still do one more thing, that's to monitor our process, how well it is working, and to evaluate the process to possibly improve the quality of the process. One cornerstone of sustainable green procurement is that we use life cycle costing, not just simple costs of a product, but what are the costs over the entire life cycle. And on the basis of that understanding of costing, we can include far more aspects than if we just look at the product as is. So we would start with the price. Then we look at the total cost of ownership of the car, for example. We look at the life cycle cost with CO2 emissions, other impacts, and we may even take into account effects we may not be able to put monetary values on, like some health effects, but they may play a role in the decision of the procurement. So it's possible to actually include such aspects as well. So here, it's easier to read. What are the costs that occur to the organization? That's practically the price of the product plus total cost of ownership. Okay. And then we have cost to society. Some of them we can express in monetary terms, and some of them are even beyond monetary terms. But it's possible to include pretty much all of this. And what we use for that is point scales. We can actually rank different goods across different aspects with a point scale. And once we give points for financial performance, environmental performance, social performance, we have certain values that are achieved by the tenders, and then we can actually add up the points and get the total of the achieved marks across all the different aspects. And on that basis, we can actually decide upon the procurement. Now, basically, for sustainable procurement, we divide our criteria into two main fields. One is what we would call the technical criteria. Those are the criteria that have to be met. If such a criterion is not met, the offer is disqualified from the process. It won't be taken in. And then there are award criteria. Those are criteria that can be met, and the better they're met, the higher the ranking. But even if you don't meet them, you can still get a contract if everything else is just perfect. Okay, so we make a distinction between technical specifications and award criteria. You see in this list, this is actually from the EU system. We have 5 technical criteria from CO2 emissions through energy consumption, air pollutant emissions. Then on the other side, we have award criteria where you see, okay, this is CO2 emissions again, but this is lower CO2 emissions than the threshold value for the technical criteria that has to be met. If you're above that value, you're disqualified, but below that value, you can still earn additional points. Now, if we look at the mandatory requirements, there is a very interesting handbook done for the Latin American countries on sustainable procurement, and that gives very good values for minimum emission standards, minimum recycled content, compliance with international standards, something like a minimum warranty, and minimum availability of spare parts. So that's for car procurement. It's a pretty good systematic set. The values, of course, change over time, and one has to be critical of some older values, but if you update them, bring them up to speed, then you have a pretty good system. And in the same handbook by the INGP, you find the award criteria, the optional requirements, and there you see, okay, it goes into somewhat different categories, and all of these categories, again, they are done in a way that you can reach higher or lower marks on those, but it does not have, for example, a car does not have to have a gear shift indicator. If it has a gear shift indicator, it adds a point to your ranking, or you have a tire pressure monitor or you don't have it. It's not that important that you would disqualify the offer, but it gets a higher point if it actually has that on board. if we look at examples of advanced award criteria, there are a number of criteria which are then calculated in quantitative ways, so that the higher your result, or if it's emissions, the lower your result from the calculations is, the better you will actually be ranked with the points for that criterion. One very interesting aspect in sustainable procurement for cars and e-vehicles is specific for e-vehicles. It is concerning the batteries. Batteries are the main new environmental concern for e-vehicles. So you want really to be very efficient in the intake of rare raw materials. And on the other side, you want to minimize the environmental impact of the batteries at the end of their lifetime, and you want to try to recycle as much as possible. Now, many of these things, like the recycling, are only possible if you know very well what's in the battery. And the better you know what's in the battery, the better and the more efficient is your recycling process. Now, for enabling that kind of lifetime handling of batteries, the EU has come up with a legislation concerning digital battery passports. It's not just the EU, but it kind of developed from that side. It's now an international trend to mandate digital battery passports. Comes with each battery, and it tells you all the necessary information about the battery that you're confronted with. That will be a very important element of future procurement here. It's not totally integrated into the present EU process, but it's on the way of being integrated there, and it will be integrated into all the procurement processes. And if you look at this overview of all the information that you get with the digital battery passport, you see this really covers a lot of ground. And once you have that information, you can deal with that battery much better. Even although the official procurement regulations of the EU have not fully picked up the question of batteries, it's in the preparation that batteries will be a major part of the award criteria for the car procurement. And even today, before that will come to be practiced in 2027, we already find that producers need to take batteries back free of charge. That's a requirement. Producers need to provide take back and collection systems for e-vehicle batteries. So again, it's moving forward in the right direction. And recyclers need to reach minimum recycling efficiencies of critical materials. And we see that the industry is acting accordingly. So procurement and rules for procurement have a big impact. Here you see the starting sheet for the procurement process of cars, and a lot of the stuff is by 2027 or by 2030, things have to be done in a certain way. A lot of that is to come. Some of the stuff is already in place since 2025. Now, if we look at national best practice, we do have a lot of very good material. We have good standard definitions. We have good material that can easily be used for actually setting up your own processes. One of the best manuals for that is a handbook by UNEP that you see here on the left-hand side. And the other one is training material from the ISD. It's another handbook where you've seen some excerpts from before in my presentation. Those two actually can help extremely well to establish good processes. And if we combine that with the new developments under the EU for battery passports, then we get to a very good international standard. Now, if we look at the regional context, where are we at in the region? And this is kind of looking at the broad picture CARICOM. And once we looked at the region, I will look at our 5 countries. Now, if we look at CARICOM and procurement, then there is one standard document. And if you come from the outside and look at it and say, well, great, we do have a CARICOM protocol on public procurement. Unified framework in paragraph 34, it actually says, okay, good, if you do green procurement, that's allowed. But then you look at it and you find out that only 4 out of 15 CARICOM member states have ratified the protocol so far. So it's a good framework, it's a good protocol, but it has not been put into practice in many places because countries were reluctant to follow it. Now in 2021, the framework for regional integration policy, the FRRP, was enacted. That's an even stronger framework for sustainable green procurement. It actually aligns with the best practice. It supports transparency, value for money principle, and sustainability, but it's a non-binding document. So it gives you some guidance if you care to have it, but if you don't care, you don't have to go by anything. So yes, it's an interesting document. It points in the right direction, but it would be so much better if it would be kind of a binding document for the member states. So if we look at the regional situation, those are the 2 key documents actually applicable. What are we looking at? We have a fragmented legal framework because every country does its own. We have this overarching protocol, but it's hardly taken into account. And disparate procurement laws, and in a number of countries, we have outdated procurement systems, which are some not even in line with the basic procurement rules for good procurement, not to speak of green or sustainable procurement. We have very limited sustainable green procurement policy mandates in the countries, and we have rather limited sets of tools here. And we have, on top of all that, limited institutional capacity and limited monitoring, so we don't really know how good we are. And we have low protocol adoption. So in the region, there are a couple of things that we really can improve if we are able to follow international best practice. Now, if we look at the status of sustainable green public procurement policies at the 5 countries we looked at, and you will have a small difference when I talk about the countries. We have 3 flagship countries in the project, and we have 2 further project countries. If there is a little ship on the slide, you see it's a flagship country. So Jamaica is a flagship country, and it actually has a comprehensive procurement legal framework, but it does lack the mandate for sustainable green public procurement. Very helpful is that at the center stands the value for money principle. So it's not just the cheapest that will come into play, but we look at the value for money, and depending on how you interpret that, then that can actually help you. But we're not actually referring to sustainable green public procurement in the acts that we have in Jamaica, Public Procurement Act 2015, 2018, 25. It's still not there. Another thing that's difficult in Jamaica is that we don't have a centralized procurement body. We have 198, almost 200 individual procuring entities. So although Jamaica would have the capacity for streamlining this, it's not a streamlined thing at the government level at the moment. Challenges are staffing, standard templates, although some are there, and of course, sustainable green public procurement tools. If we look at Grenada, one more flagship country, we see we have sustainable procurement policy in place. Grenada is the only one of our 5 countries that actually has a sustainable procurement policy. Unfortunately, it's lacking the support of legislation, so it is not really carried through to the full extent. There is still quite a bit of work to be done to put this into practice. If we look at Belize, we find, okay, Belize is one of the few signatories of the CARICOM procurement protocol, but no sustainable green procurement principles in the acts and policies. If we look at Antigua and Barbuda, we find sustainable green public procurement policy for one department. The Department of the Environment has its own procurement policy, and that actually has the principles of sustainability and green procurement in it. But then on the other hand, we have a general procurement process that needs, just as a basic procurement process, massive improvement. We have procurement process that's governed by an outdated act, which is concentrating the decisions at a tenders board, which is lacking things like transparency and other basic principles. Then we have a draft Modern Procurement Act of 2011, which was never enacted. And we have this single development of the sustainable procurement policy that only applies to the Department of the Environment. So that is a very dispersed situation. And I think I jumped St. Lucia. Here in St. Lucia. In St. Lucia, we are progressing toward modern procurement, but again, we lack enforceable, sustainable green public procurement mandates. So yes, it's moving in the right direction, but it has not carried the policy all the way to where we would need to go. Okay, that was our third flagship country that I just jumped over by the cursor here. Now, if we look at the country situation, we can summarize that with 3 main statements. We find that laws on procurement lack sustainable green public procurement policy mandates, and they lack life cycle costing. We find that staff is not trained in sustainability criteria. we may find that the leading persons in procurement systems may know well about the principles of sustainable green public procurement, but the staff that does normal procurement processes normally is not at that information level. And if we look at many countries, we may find poor coordination across ministries, but that's not everywhere the case. Now, if we move now into our findings on what would be our recommendations for further development in the project countries, we see that we find 3 areas: legislative reform, improvements in the procurement process, and the third area is actually improvements of the general conditions for e-mobility. It's not just enough to improve the procurement, but it is necessary to improve those conditions as well. And we have a number of single suggestions here. I will run through them briefly. We can go into more detail later, but just for you to get an idea what this is about. Legislative reform, first thing, update and expand procurement legislation reform. This needs to get a stronger push, and we need to include the necessary aspects of sustainable green procurement. Second, adopt sustainable green public procurement policy. Only in Grenada we had that. In all the other countries, we're lacking that. Introduce model procurement clauses that make it easy to go into sustainable procurement. Could be adoption of clauses or green rider templates that we could encourage here. Fourth, in the legal field, legal and regulatory support for private sector participation is necessary. To encourage the participation of local suppliers, we need to have clear frameworks and provisions for them to actually be able to take part in the process. And they need to be encouraged. If we start specifying goods in the process in such a way that we discourage local suppliers and dealers, then we do a disfavor to the local economies. If we look at the possible improvements in the procurement process, we have a number of things. First of all, it is necessary to implement a structured standard approach for sustainable green procurement in each country. And that can easily follow the handbook recommendations from UNEP or from the OAS ING handbook. Those 2 handbooks really provide the necessary structures for such processes, but we need to establish them. Second, we need to improve the training of all procurement officers in sustainable green procurement. It's not just enough if the leading heads know about it. We need to train all the guys that they can actually do this. Third, we should try to establish a regional procurement help desk. The EU has, for the entire European Union, has such a help desk where everyone who has a question about green procurement and sustainable procurement can actually go and get help for whatever they're doing. That's an extremely interesting practical thing. Number 4, in the procurement process, improve the basic needs assessment for the procurement of government cars. One of the things that we found is government employees try to hold on to as big a car as humanly possible, as whatever they can get. But this often leads to total misspecification of what they need. And at the basis of procurement should be a proper needs assessment. So that's one point where we would need to go from small people driving around in big cars for nothing, but for the prestige. It's not for the prestige, it's for the use of the cars that we need to look at. What are they used for? What do they need? Number 5, develop specific criteria for vehicle and EV procurement. Here, we really need to specify exactly what we need. What are the musts and what are the nice to haves? The technical criteria well specified, clearly laid out, and the award criteria specified in the way that they give an incentive to actually supply an even better product. Number 6, develop socioeconomic procurement criteria for vehicles and EV procurement. Social criteria, economic criteria, how does all that fit together so that we can capture these aspects of sustainable procurement as well? And of course, improve the monitoring of the procurement process success. Only in very few cases we found that the results of a procurement process were monitored, not at the level that would be desirable, but in the other cases, there is no monitoring, and that definitely is no help for improving the process. Then we need to implement EV policy targets for public fleets into the procurement plans. We may find very, very ambitious plans like in Jamaica to convert very fast the public fleet, but then it doesn't land into the procurement plans and it will never be translated if that is not happening. And last but not least, better connect the Caribbean countries to the INGP framework or the organization. That's the Inter-American Network of Government Procurement. And INGP has done some trend-setting work here. The handbook that I showed you, one of the two is actually co-authored by INGP, and INGP has actually come up with very good suggestions for sustainable procurement. So that could be a better bridge. All the Caribbean countries, all the CARICOM countries are members of the organization, but they hardly ever use what's coming out of the organization. Last but not least, we need to improve the general conditions for e-mobility. It's not just enough to work on the procurement. First, we need to set clear standards for charging infrastructure that the public charging infrastructure can accommodate what will come in cars that come for charging at these charging points. So clear standards, and then standards that most likely should support different international plugs, for example, that you can charge different sorts of cars at one charging station. And of course, we need to prepare the electrical grid for the accommodation of e-mobility. If we want to put a charging station, but we don't have the grid to deliver the electricity that's necessary, we have a problem. Then, as much as possible, increase the share of domestic renewable electricity as fast as possible. That accelerates the positive impact of e-mobility as nothing else. And at the same time, it will save you a lot of hard currency that you spend on imports for oil and gas. So increase domestic renewables, you can only benefit. Establish professional battery recycling systems. Presently in the Caribbean, there are hardly such things. There may be some half-professional collection systems that then connect to international recycling systems, but in many cases, we don't even have that. Deposit and return systems sometimes could help, or mandatory recycling. And for the batteries, introduce mandatory battery passports. They will be available if you require them. The batteries and the cars will come with them. There are the standards set in Europe. There are similar standards being developed in China, and those are the main markets exporting the cars. So it is absolutely doable. Just require them. Just say this car is not going to be imported if it does not come with a digital battery passport. Introduce minimum safety standards for e-vehicles and especially e-buses. We've seen examples where the lack of such standards leads to price dumping of some Chinese companies that then get very low cost and prices by reducing the safety standards, and then you may have huge problems in car accidents and with fire hazards. So those standards are extremely essential, especially for public transport. Educate the teaching staff of academic and skills training institutions for e-mobility. You need a lot of staff for the maintenance and repair of e-vehicles. The garages need the guys, and we need to do the training. And of course, we need to have the trainers that are skilled and equip these guys with state-of-the-art technical equipment. Now, if you look at some of the dealerships, the big dealerships, which are cooperating very closely with the big manufacturers, then you see what it actually requires to have a fully equipped workshop for e-mobility. And of course, that at the best state of the art needs to be there in the training institutions. And one of the things that we came across, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be an important one in the long term, is we need to train all firefighters in the handling of EV accidents, not just a few. They all need to know what's special. If I come to an accident with e-vehicles and there is a fire, what is necessary to be done? They really need that training. So what can we take home from this whole session right now? Well, first of all, sustainable green public procurement policy in transport could help to pave the way for climate-friendly transport. We're talking about a significant share of the car market, so here governments can play a very important role. But it will be necessary to establish sustainable green procurement practices by law. It is not enough to just talk about them. Sustainable green public procurement can build on solid procurement systems in most CARICOM member countries. So just the basics of diligent, proper procurement is given in most of the countries, some even not, but most have that, and we can build the sustainable and green components onto that. But without staff training, sustainable green public procurement cannot be implemented successfully, even if we have the right policies and the right policies. And thank you very much that you have stayed with me. And I'm at the end of the presenting session and absolutely ready for all questions and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Omar. A lot of information to digest. And as we prepare to put our questions to Prof. and Brian, you can give us an indication of how much time we will have to do that. I just reflect that the sustainable green public procurement policies allows the countries to have higher efficiencies, energy savings, climate benefits, and of course, fit for purpose. There are already pathways, as you have outlined, for sustainable green public procurement to become a reality and not, some fancy new climate terminology or transport terminology. We do, in fact, have regional frameworks, as you made it very clear, that allows for collaboration, and that at the country level, there are already levels and opportunities for sustainable green public procurement. You made it very clear, though, that we may have some gaps in policies and legislation, and that there may be some capacity development needs in the way forward. And of course, the conditions for e-mobility has to be in place to give support. So I thank you for guiding us through that. We have a few minutes, maybe about 10 minutes or so for questions, and I invite your questions now. I have two of mine, but Prof and I have had many conversations, so I prefer if you ask your questions. All right, let me kick off with one. So a thought came to mind when you were speaking about the battery passports. And I just wondered for the Caribbean and for the countries which were highlighted or CARICOM members, would battery passports necessarily require inter-regional agreements or maybe just agreements between the manufacturers and recyclers and the Caribbean?
Well, the passports actually could be required by each country separately. It would help if all the countries would join, because then it would enlarge the market for recycling. And it would structure it in a very, very good and easy way, because every car battery coming into the region could be identified exactly and could be handled to the fullest extent in the recycling system. But still, if the others don't move, it's still a lot better a country does it by itself and moves on it. And then it should try to make it mandatory for each and every e-vehicle that's imported into the country. Because if you get only a mixture, if, for example, it's just in every second government procurement, it's required, it's not required for any other imported car, and it's just a few exotic things that have a passport and the rest doesn't come with it. So it needs to be a national system and it needs to be a national requirement. That's clear. But everything that can be done at CARICOM level and can be made binding would be perfect.
Thanks, Prof. I'm going to follow the questions in this order. I have one from Brian Constantine, then I saw Mr. Hussein's hand, and then I saw Xavier's hand. So the question from Brian is, what role can the private sector play in strengthening and implementing sustainable green public procurement policies? And how can collaboration between government and business drive innovation and efficiency to achieve sustainability goals? So what role can the private sector play in strengthening and implementing SGPP? And how does collaboration between government and business drive towards the sustainable goals?
Yeah, well, a couple of questions in one. First of all, I think the role of the private sector towards sustainable green public procurement is that the private sector can encourage government to do things, to actually require. If some government officials get into a situation where the public sector says, yes, we're ready for it, and it's so much easier to actually make it binding, as if you would have no signals or negative signals from the private sector. If we look at the question of collaboration between government and the private sector to drive innovation, there are different aspects to it. If you're lucky, it can be very fruitful. Normally, the interaction is in the way that the government sets a framework and requires things. It's okay, this is what we want. And the public sector has the freedom to fulfill that in the most different ways and try to do it least cost. So the private part is supposed to be the innovator, and the government is supposed to set the right conditions to incentivize the innovations. And if you get that straight and you understand your role as government, then you can actually help the process tremendously by setting the right rules for the process. As long as
Okay.
you're lacking them, it may just not work. Or you may be actually inducing an even new market or the substitution of old technology by new by setting the right rules and setting the right incentives. What comes to my mind there, it goes a bit beyond procurement policy, but if you look, for example, at the attempt to introduce renewables very fast, then you will find, okay, if you have a situation where it clearly pays off to have your PV system, then people will go for it. So it's, if we've seen it, and we've seen it in Barbados, where after the introduction of a feed-in tariff, we had the jumpstart of the private installations of PV systems from a situation where it just was very small to a situation where we have more applications for connection to the grid than the grid can handle at the moment. So it just really can jumpstart the development. And of course, that creation of a market creates innovation as well.
Okay. So it's a little bit of innovation, entrepreneurial competence supported by the framework and enabling.
Mhm.
Thanks, Prof. So let's go to Mr. Hussein and then Mr. Gordon, then Paul. Mr. Hussein, you are muted, so you could unmute yourself. All right, let's go to Mr. Gordon and then we can come back to Mr. Hussein.
Hi, morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you, Xavier.
Morning. Thank you guys again for inviting me. I'm Xavier Gordon, CEO of Flash Motors. We provide electric mobility solutions across the Caribbean, both vehicles and charging infrastructure. Professor, you had touched on a good point, especially coming from a Jamaican context. We're based in Jamaica, and having just faced Hurricane Melissa, one of the main issues we're having is that all of our public DC charging infrastructure is grid tied. And so while Eastern and Central Jamaica, for the most part, are back up and running, Western and the Northwestern part of Jamaica, which is, a significant part of our population and economic center, are still without access to DC charging. And in the greater context, of course, utility has to prioritize different loads. And, unfortunately, where we are right now, electric mobility isn't a priority. So how important will it be in procurement going forward for having resilient infrastructure? We've put up infrastructure all across the Caribbean, from Guyana all the way up into the Bahamas. But one of the things we just have not seen happening is resilient infrastructure. And I think it might not even be a Caribbean problem. I think worldwide, most infrastructure, just based on its nature, is tied to the grid. But I think perhaps the Caribbean being especially vulnerable, is there any sort of focus or special initiative to look at resiliency within the infrastructure side? Thanks.
Yeah, well, I think resilience in the infrastructure has always been a main concern far before we ever talked e-mobility, but different countries of the world see it in a very different way. I come from a country where resilience in the electrical infrastructure and the dependability is valued extremely highly. So if we look at the situation in my home state here in Schleswig-Holstein, we have less than 8 minutes of electricity loss per year. In other countries, you may find half an hour or an hour even, and it depends on the general circumstances and on the policies put. But what you find as well is that in the countries where you actually put the grid underground, you have a far higher reliability of the electricity system. And in the Caribbean, I would say you would have the survivability of hurricanes increase tremendously if you would actually go to underground cabling. But it's different between different countries. In Germany, we put everything, during the last 20 years, we've put everything into the ground and have a highly stable system, very resilient. And if we connect our electrical charging infrastructure to that, it just is the same. Unless somebody comes and tries to steal the copper from the cables and cuts the cables, those charging stations are extremely reliable. On the other hand, if you're in a system where everything is exposed to outside impacts and you have the free hanging cables and you get into a hurricane, then you will have everything down for quite some time. And then you actually have quite a difference between the ICE vehicle that is independent for a day or two, at least as long as you have gasoline in your tank. You can still drive around, but once you have to go to your filling station, that filling station will depend on electricity, and you may run into the same bottleneck as the e-vehicle charging. But what I would see is, at least for the core part of the grids in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, St. Vincent, wherever you go, I think it's extremely important to make the grid hurricane tight and then increase the resilience of the entire system, and by that help to increase the resilience of the charging. That would be my answer. It's not an easy one, but I would even tap into specific international funding for climate change mitigation and adaptation that are made available.
Definitely, I understand. And I think, one of the things about Germany that's unique, it's a very distributed grid. If you look at just like a state like Bavaria or wherever, where you have quite a bit of independence in your transmission and distribution, you have multiple utilities. And then, of course, the penetration of solar, even on a individual scale, with German households having quite a bit of PV, despite not necessarily having the greatest weather, and having quite a bit of on-site storage as well.
Yeah.
The distribution, the degree of distribution and independence that you have in Germany, which has been forged over the last 20 years or so, makes it by inherent a lot more resilient than what we would have in the Caribbean. So I guess your answer is that there is a overall infrastructure problem that we have that would need to get solved. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. We are right upon our closing time, but I, with a little grace from Brian, want to take Mr. Hussein's question, and I will just read one from Paul. So Mr. Hussein, if you're ready and available, you can unmute your mic.
Hi, good morning, everyone. You hear me clear?
Yeah.
Very clear.
All right, so thanks, Mr. David. Hussein here from Guyana. Thanks, Professor, for the presentation. Though I joined late. When I did join, you were mentioned about passport for EVs. So I think somebody else asked the question. You give a bit of explanation, which is good. I'm looking in the context of incentives in that area. So that would be in question one. And number two would have been, I think was your second to last slide or your last slide 14 into portions on the emergency response on those stuff. Why I ask this question is because I know Professor Stevenson with Dr. Blair and the others from CARICOM would have done some training. And if you look at the whole dynamics of all the Caribbean countries that getting more and more electric vehicles, I mean, putting into the training into the TVET areas, then it would have been a good initiative so that technicians or even students can learn in case we emergency on the road, they know exactly what to do or how to handle the situation.
Mr. Hussein, if you wouldn't mind, if you could perhaps just condense your question. I think you have sort of two questions there. Just condense them and give it to Prof one more time. Just the questions.
Sure. My apologies. So number one would have been if there is any incentives or any framework pertaining to the passport that you were speaking about for EV.
Okay.
One. And second one would have been intensive work or training for those technicians in emergency response electric vehicles in terms of fire.
Okay.
Right. Now, if I get you wrong, first question is there or are there incentive systems for EVs in place? Did I get that right?
Well, for the battery passport, I think it is.
For the battery passports of EVs.
Correct.
Okay, so far in the Caribbean's none. In the EU, it is on its way that by 2027 it will be mandatory for each and every car. But as of the time of our project here in the Caribbean, there was no such thing.
So no real incentive on it, but the legislation is in place for compliance.
There's nothing.
No, I mean for Europe. I'm sorry, for Europe.
For Europe, it's a European-wide regulation
Right.
that actually requires battery passports for every e-vehicle. So it's EU 27 wide. Every e-vehicle that comes into play by January 2027.
All right, thanks, Rob. And the second one?
The second was on the training, where I'm not quite sure what was the question. Did I understand it right that you say there has been some training on the e-vehicle part in the Caribbeans?
Yes.
What I was referring.
For sure, UWI has, within this project, the NDC Tech, UWI has done training for first responders and also has developed level 3 and level 4 standard for servicing HEVs and BEVs. So, Mr. Hussein, you want to just refine that one more time?
So additional to that, to those training, would there be any more, I won't say training directly, but any more framework as in of these forest responders and EV technicians in that area, to be specific?
Okay, well, for the trainings, normally the main car manufacturers are actually setting the standards as well. If you look at the big car dealers, they are more trained by the car manufacturers than by anyone else. But of course, you cannot fly every technician to the manufacturers. You will have to establish the training capacities internally in the Caribbeans. And what we have seen at the time of the project is that those capacities are still lacking. They need to be ramped up, but there are some efforts underway, like at UE, to actually mend that problem. But I think there's still quite a way to go that this becomes kind of standard for all the training institutions.
Thanks.
One more aspect is that many of the training institutions are still lacking the state-of-the-art equipment for the e-vehicle maintenance and repairs, and the training in that area is difficult. Firefighters, again, somewhat different thing, because they need to understand the problem and how to handle it, but they need to be taught, and we see that some of that is done, but so far not for all the firefighters as it would be necessary as the market is ramping up.
Thanks, Prof. We'll close the question and answer here with one last question from Paul Taylor at CARICOM Secretariat. And the question is, how should procurement contracts be structured to incentivize suppliers to take back products for reuse or recycling, given the logistical constraints of island nations? How should procurement contracts be structured to incentivize the supplier to take back products or recycle or reuse, given the logistical constraints within the islands? Thank you.
Well, we find
Thanks, Mr. David. Thanks, Prof.
We find that actually the local constraints are transcended in the case of the batteries, for example. We find in Jamaica private entrepreneurs who established collection systems, and they are connected to international recycling companies. So they collect the batteries and put them into the international recycling system, and it's handled properly. So you won't need everything locally, but you definitely need the collection system. Now, in the procurement, you can incentivize for that in the way that you require the proof of the recycling possibility. And is even the case that some of the main manufacturers of e-vehicles require their sales companies in the region to show them that they have contracts for taking back the batteries of the cars and recycling them. And if they say we secure recycling, they have to have signed contracts with a recycling company that takes care of the batteries. So in the case of, for example, Mercedes-Benz, that's a requirement. Unless you have signed that and you go by it, you will not get e-vehicles from Mercedes to be sold by you in your country. That goes quite a way for new cars, but of course, you need to cover the used cars, for example, imported into Jamaica. But in procurement, it simply takes making it mandatory, and before it goes, they need to show you, okay, here is how the recycling is done. Here's the contract. But as I showed in the process of sustainable green public procurement, one of the steps in there is to make sure that your local suppliers can adhere to that. So talk to them beforehand, before you actually introduce it in the mandatory part of your procurement, because they need to get ready for it and they need to be prepared to do it once you require them to do it. So it's a multi-stage process there.
Thank you, Prof. Brian, I hand over to you.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Barrett. I believe there's a question, there's an additional question from Paul that has a gender element to it, and
All right.
if we can get to that.
Sure, not a problem. Okay, so the question from Paul is, what tender evaluation criteria can be embedded to maximize socioeconomic benefits without compromising competitiveness? So for example, are there any local value added criteria or gender, women, youth, ownership, or any fair wage clause which can be added in the tender evaluation criteria so that you maximize that socio-economic benefit without compromising competitiveness?
Well, I think there's no general answer to that. It depends on each situation that you have to evaluate what are the possibilities in the social aspects, for example, or the environmental, and you need to evaluate how far that increases the price of the product. Now, some requirements may not increase price at all. Others may increase price for the good. For example, if we take the safety standards for the buses, if you get a cheap, bad bus, high risk in any case, that may come $10,000 cheaper than the proper bus. Now, in that case, if you require certain safety standards or environmental standards for other things would do the same, it increases the price. But in the tendering process, you need to weigh. That's one of the challenges. You need to go beyond saying, okay, I want everything, but it still needs to be the cheapest product. You have to say, okay, how much emphasis is on this environmental thing or this social aspect? What are the criteria that actually decide whether you include this offer into the process at all? So are they technical criteria must meet, or are they award criteria where you can say, okay, if it is better on gender, it gives you 5 extra points or something on a 100 scale. Or if it's better on recycling, you can earn 8 points. Or if it's better on lifetime, you can earn another 5 points. So there you can incentivize without killing the thing, but you need to be clear that not all of this comes for free. It may carry cost, like in the safety example. And if you want to have a safe bus, you better don't buy the cheap one because it does not do the job. In that case, the safety standard would actually be a technical kill criteria. If it's not met, no bus. It is just not in the sample that you are able or you want to buy from because it is just too bad. So you throw it out and then you look at what are the costs. And don't worry, that thing would have been cheaper, but it would cost your neck, right? So it's along those lines that you need to look at it.
Thank you, Prof. Brian?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Barrett and Professor Homeyer. On behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to the GIZ and especially our presenter and moderator for the insightful and thought-provoking discussions for today's webinar. Your experience, your expertise and perspective have basically enriched the discussions that we would have had today. To our attendees, we want to say a special thank you for joining us, for your active participation. We hope that the session today has basically sparked new ideas and create some amount of collaboration that will help advance the resilience and innovation across the community. So until next time, I want to say let's take care and stay connected. And I would just also like to remind you that our webinar series continues tomorrow with our 5th webinar that looks at biofuels as renewables innovation for sustainable energy transition and inclusive development in the Caribbean. So commencing at 10 a.m., we hope to see you all there. Do trust that you have a productive week and see you tomorrow. Thanks everyone.
You, Brian, and thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.